A distinctly important question to answer. Should we look at the ACC differently than the Big 12?
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest and craziest sport on planet Earth. Lincoln Riley called a fraud by Paul Finebaum, I think again is an appropriate word to put in there. And the latest on five-star Brandon Arrington, all on today's show. But blurry or not, we've got my guy Kenton Gibbs, Locked On ACC, Locked On Wolfpack here on the pod, because I want to talk about the ACC angle of all these playoff changes, Kenton. There was one proposal. It's not the 5+11. I want your thoughts on that in a moment. But there was a proposal that got, spread around by the bigwig reporters that have been talking about this stuff that once considered a 4-4-3-2-1 option, where the ACC would get 3 bids, the Big 12 would only get 2. In your view, is that fair to consider the ACC as a superior league to the Big 12? Because I think generally it's the Big 10 and SEC, and then it's the ACC and the Big 12. Do you think the ACC has a leg up on the Big 12 at all in the football sense?
I don't think any conference has a divine and God-given right to get more guaranteed bids than another. I'm a big proponent of line it the hell up. I don't think the ACC should get more than the Big 12. I don't think the Big 12 should get more than the ACC. I don't think the Big 10 and the SEC should get more than the ACC or the Big 12. I am a very firm believer in, if you are going to do a system of quote-unquote guarantees, those guarantees should come with certain ties to them. Like, you get a guaranteed bid if your third best team is inside a certain margin, let's say 15 or so. And then we can have a serious conversation about, you know what, I can see what you mean in terms of, this team might get knocked out of the top 15 or whatever the case may be because of 3 losses to teams that are in the top 5, which may need to be weighted a little bit differently. But the idea that, I play difficult teams on paper, therefore I am a better team regardless of the outcome of those games, is just foolish to say the least. I mean, Syracuse this year has an absolute murderer's row of a schedule. Half of the playoff from last year, Syracuse is going to see them, or they're going to see Syracuse at some point in time during the season, right? Is anybody going to say, Syracuse won 8 games, but they only lost to playoff teams from last year? I think they belong in the playoff this year. Hell no. And I love Fran Brown. You love Fran Brown. Everybody loves Fran Brown. What's not to love about the guy? Besides the winners get watched thing. You deserve soap regardless of your W or F. But that's just how I feel about it. I don't think that either format where you're guaranteeing 4 bids to conference X, Y, or Z or A, B, or C helps out. Because, again, I think that everybody can have a down year. You want to talk about the 4th best team in the SEC last year? What the hell business would a team that only put up 3 points against Oklahoma have doing in a play? What business would they have there? A team that lost to the mighty Vanderbilt Commodores in a stadium that was mid-construction. What a ruckus crowd environment there that they couldn't overcome. That team should have been in the playoff. Come on now, let's knock it off.
So it sounds like, I don't want to speak for you, of course. That's why I bring you on the show, to speak for yourself, so to speak. No pun intended with the ESPN show. But it sounds like you'd be a fan of the 5+11 format, as I would be, because that doesn't give any guarantee except to a conference champion. And I have heard all sorts of negative discourse on the 5+11. It's a psyop for the Big 10 and SEC. This would be a disaster. Joel Klatt said it would destroy the Big 12. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute. Guaranteeing 1 bid a year compared to 2 bids a year in a 14 or probably 16 team format is the difference between destroying the league and not? And who's to say, by the way, the Big 12 couldn't still get 2 in? Like, is there an element of risk to it? Sure. I recognize that you put the power in the hands of the committee. I'm more pro-committee than most. But I look at a season like a couple of years ago when TCU went to the title game, Kenton, the Big 12 would have had their 2 teams in. So it sounds like the Big 12 or the ACC have to have programs go out and have a high level of success. And so is that something that you're on board with, the 5+11 format?
I'm going to say something that's going to make me and you lose all credibility because somebody is going to chop this up very deceptively, and I'm okay with that. My original plan for any playoff beyond 12 has stayed the same and has not changed in terms of what I would prefer to see. Every single conference champion gets an auto bid unless your team is outside the RPI top 35. I don't want to see a 7-6 Central Michigan in. Sure, I agree to that. That's fair. That's fine. I'm not saying every conference is created equally. I'm not saying that. However, I also don't want to see a situation where 2 group of 5 teams that are 11 or 12 win teams are right up against it in terms of 12-1, 11-2, and they get put out for a 4 or 5 loss team because that 4 or 5 loss team is from a better conference. No. If they're outside the RPI top 35, absolutely, or FPI top 35, whichever ranking system you go with, I'm fine with that. I think everybody should get a shot. Line it the hell up. I don't believe anybody is given a God-given right to be better. I don't think it should be, just the Power 4 conferences and then one other group of 5, which most people say, well, it's the top 5 rated conference champions. But even still, I think that kind of, leaves potential for multiple group of 5s to have an outside looking in type of seat when they've had spectacular years that need to be given a chance here because, that 3-loss team is Ole Miss. Ole Miss ain't one of
the G5 will get their highest ranked champion in every year. That I don't think has majorly wavered.
I'm saying multiple. But I'm saying if there's multiple G5 teams that have a year that's worked, right? Like if we're looking at Boise State and they're doing Boise State things and they're looking absolutely spectacular. And then you're looking at a team out of the Sun Belt or something like that that's putting belt to behind like UCF was doing a few years ago, right? They're just everybody. UCF won every game that year by an average of 24 points. Like that's what I mean in terms of if a team goes out and does that, should they ever be on the outside looking in? And if Boise State has a sense similar to what they I don't think it's fair to say that. So that's why I believe every conference champion inside the RPI top 35 should get a shot. But if you're asking me 5 and 11 or the current discussion that's being tossed around, which is 4-4-2-2 or 4-4-3-2, I would much rather have the 5 and 11.
Finally, a man of utmost reason who sees why. And again, there's a gamble. I'm not going to deny. I'm not going to tell you to not be worried about what the committee could do. I also just watched the committee tell the SEC, no, you don't get everything you want all the time. And I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing in the world because I think strength of schedule should matter, but I think a lot of things should matter. And the committee is the only way to allow for everything to matter. And I just don't like auto bids. I really don't. So Ken's going to stick around because Paul Finebaum, ever the opinionated man in the sports talk space, said Lincoln Riley's a fraudulent head coach, and we've got differing perspectives on the matter. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you want to win big on college football, you've got a lot of options to do that because you can bet everything you could possibly want for the greatest sport on planet Earth. You could bet win totals for every team. You could bet conference title odds. You could bet national championship odds. Boise State's a favorite in the Mountain West. How about that? An odds-on favorite, not just a plus 200. No. They're minus 140 to win the Mountain West. If you think that's insane, hey, go put your money where your mouth is over at FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Paul Finebaum says Lincoln Riley is a fraud of a head coach, and we have differing definitions of that. But Kenton Gibbs of Locked On ACC is here. Now, you observe Lincoln Riley from afar, Kenton. So, from your vantage point, I'm not in the fraud camp. I don't think he's completely forgotten how to be a head coach, and I'll explain. I will allow you, as the guest on the show, to go first and stake your claim as to why you believe he is a fraud of a head coach.
I mean, I think that it's been shown by what we've seen. I'm not going to argue for, Lincoln Riley is a terrible head coach. He's never won anywhere. He's never done anything good. However, when teams do have resources on a level that is equal to his, all of a sudden he starts to look real pedestrian, doesn't it? All of a sudden, when he's no longer one of the big two brands in the conference, it's so interesting how it's just sheer, utter nothingness. And what do I mean by that, you would ask? Well, as a member of the Pac-12, 11-3, 8-5, what did he do in his first year in the Big Ten? 7-6. And don't get me wrong, I understand what the travel schedule does to student athletes. I am one of the firm believers in one of the worst side effects of the conference realignment and all the things we're seeing. It should have never gotten to this point where we lost regionality in football. It should have never got here. We should have never been in a situation where 1 week you got to go play Rutgers and then you come back and then you got to play Iowa and then you come back. And we should have never got there. We should have never been there. So I understand that. However, to say that accounts for a difference of 3 wins or losses, when again, all you're being asked to do is play teams with equal amounts of resources to you, equal amounts of lore and history to you, all of a sudden you fall off a cliff. I'm not saying you look funny in the light, but maybe this is a case for fake watch buster. We may need to put the diamond tester on the bezel because it's looking a little fraudulent to me.
Here's where I come at it from. And I'm not trying to downplay the pressure that he can really cultivate if this season looks as it did last year. Like, their preseason win total, their schedule is, solidly tough, but not overly impossible necessarily. Like, they've got some tough games. They've got to play Notre Dame, as they always have. Don't know if they always will. But they have to go to Oregon, of course. Like, they've got plenty of matchups that you go, that's not going to be easy. Right. That's going to be a difficult game to win. But this is USC, and we're seeing on the recruiting trail right now, as they continue to hold the number 1 class in the 2026 cycle, what they're capable of. And what they're capable of on the trail is still what they're capable of on the field. So I don't think that the standard or expectation at USC should drop down. I don't think he has dropped it down, because I do think that if this season looks like last year, 6-6 and then win a bowl game, yeah, you had a couple of nice wins against the SEC, which we all know is not as strong as it used to be, given by the fact that they lost to USC twice with LSU and Texas A&M, who were respectable teams in the SEC this year. You can't do that again and not be on the hot seat going into next season. If you want to call Lincoln Riley overpaid, sure, you can. But where I'll step in and defend him a bit is he did not take over the USC of old. He took over the brand, and because in the first year, with the best player in college football, they overperformed with a defense that was complete and utter garbage, and then was trashed the next year, and he deserves, and I have blamed him for that, because anybody should blame him for bringing Alex Grinch over from Oklahoma. It was a horrible decision. But he was not taking over a primed post-Pete Carroll USC. He was taking over a Clay Helton mess that had gone 4-8 the year before. And even at a place like USC, even with the way you can build a roster in the transfer portal nowadays, and with NIL and all that stuff, I'm still someone who is willing to be patient. And if it's another step back this year, okay, this is now moving into you win next year or you're fired territory. But I don't know exactly what the definition of a fraudulent head coach is, but I don't think has been given a full, he hasn't done it smartly because he went all in on the portal in his first year, and I got to win right here, right now, but then didn't have it sustainable for the next couple of seasons. I don't think that was the right approach. Fine. That doesn't make him a fraudulent head coach. That makes him a head coach that made a mistake. That's the way I see it.
Let me tell you something. Whenever a thing happens on the team, a head coach often gets a charge or gets a ding from the NCAA called lack of institutional control. Well, guess what, buddy? We're in year 3 going into year 4. This is lack of institutional winning. With all due respect, I understand the argument for he's not a fraud. All of those losses last year were all within one possession in the fourth quarter. I understand that. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, USC was getting their doors blown off from the left to the right, from the east to the west, from the north to the south. I'm not going to say that. They were competitive. They were very competitive. However, what I will say is this. I often believe that there are about 10 to 13 brands. You cannot win 8 games a year and stay forever. Most other brands, they'll build you a statue. They'll name a town in your honor. They'll give you a day. You'll never have to buy a drink in that city again. I know because I played for one in Dave Dorn, with all due respect to Wolfpack Nation. He's going to leave with every record there is for NC State head coaches, and he hasn't reached the heights that Lincoln Riley has even at USC. My problem with Lincoln Riley, you have gotten worse year over year. Even if the argument is you made a mistake in that first year going that heavy in the portal, go that heavy in the portal again. Do whatever you got to do again to make it up. I can't take, Alex Grinch is the problem because you bought him, number one. Number two, even if we say, well, you got rid of them and they're going to be better now, you are still going to sit on mothers and fathers' couches and telling them, hey, your son comes to USC, he's going to be the brightest star in LA. He's going to do all these great things. We're going to do all the good stuff. You are the one responsible for doing that. If you are not doing that effectively enough defensively, if you are not getting the stars and you are not putting them in position to win, that is a lack of institutional control in terms of winning. So that is why that the buck is always going to stop at the head man feet, because you get paid the most. Your name is the one that's always out there in the press clippers and all that. And when you win, so we also got to bring it to you when you lose. And to me, it's real fraudulent to say, well, year 3, and again, one of the first times where I'm having to compete with everybody who has as many resources as me, because let's be honest, in the Pac-12, did everybody have the same resources as USC?
I mean, not everybody, but plenty of schools did. Oregon and Washington are not low on funds.
Okay, well, let's look at this. Let's look at it where his most success was had. In the Big 12, are you going to sit here and tell me a majority of those schools had the same resources as Oklahoma?
No.
Exactly. All of a sudden, when the resources become equal, you stop being that guy? It's something fishy. And I'm not just talking about the tuna that I got to eat 3 times a day to hit my protein goals.
Okay. You make a couple of valid points in there. Where I object to the word fraud is I think it implies that he has no idea how to coach, and he is making the right sorts of moves with the defensive coordinator and recruiting. And those were 2 major mistakes. I'm not trying to say he doesn't deserve the blame for those. I've said many times before he does, because of course he does. Like you said, the buck stops with him, right? However,
Yeah.
Someone who is suddenly working to right those wrongs or recognizes where his own shortcomings were, I think if you were a fraudulent head coach, had no idea what you're doing, Bill Belichick, then you would you would be making consistent decisions that don't indicate you have any idea of what is good or what is right or what puts the program on the correct trajectory. I think Lincoln Riley knows that. Right. I don't think he's completely we'll see what happens this year. The single score game record last year, it was a bad season statistically. That doesn't last unless you're just, a Scott Frost in Nebraska, in which case you get to the point, okay, nope, this guy's just clearly not good enough. So if it happens again this year, they lose a bunch of 1-score games, okay, we're going back to the head coach. But I think this is as thin of ice as I can feel comfortable putting him on, but I do think that I feel fine putting him there and saying, okay, you got to go prove something this year, but you have made these tangible changes. They were just late.
And you know what? I think the disconnect that we're having here is our definition of fraud. Because to me, a fraud is you are not as good as what everybody believed you are, right? If you look at the Wiz, right? When Richard Pryor said, "Oh, you got me, I'm a fraud," the Wizard of Oz had some type of power to create these illusions that deceive people. He just was not what everybody thought he was. Lincoln Riley is a good head coach. Let's be clear about that. I'm not saying that he's some, whack job that should be better served as an offensive coordinator, or he's the offensive version of Brent Venables or something like that, with all due respect, because I love Brent Venables. And I believe he should have been above Foster of the 2010s and 2020s. But he tried to venture out on his own, and we're seeing how that's working out. I don't think that he's that. However, when you're touted as the wizard, and we pull back the curtain and we see, oh, wait a minute, he's just a guy. Don't get me wrong. Not a bad coach, not a terrible coach, not a coach that I would say, if Lincoln Riley were to say he want to come to NC State, I would say, oh, don't you dare pick Lincoln up. I'm not saying that. But what I would say is he's not the end-all, be-all the way that many thought he was, and saying Oklahoma's holding him back. When he leaves, he's going to have everything he needs. He's going to be a big-time winner at USC, and all of a sudden he's not that. That's what I mean by fraud. Now, if you're talking about don't know what he's doing at all in coaching, I agree. The UNC Tar Heels do have a little bit of a major fraud watch on their hands, because, all I'm saying is it's a lot like Jordan without Pippen. All of a sudden, no playoff wins virtually ever. Belichick without Brady,
hasn't been good in quite a while.
Exactly. So that's why we got different definitions of fraud. If you're talking, I'm not saying he's a fraud as in a bad coach. If we're talking fraud as in bad coach, I disagree with that. He's not a fraud. If you're talking fraud as in he's not what everybody believed he was, I stand by that. 10 toes, 10 fingers. I might even put my head on the stand like Amon-Ra St. Brown in the end zone, because I absolutely believe that he's not the guy that we thought he was coming in.
See, that's why we bring on Kenton Gibbs, Locked On ACC, for that sort of reason nuance on the definition of words like fraud. We're talking 5 stars next. 1 5-star in particular, because a sneaky visit for Brandon Arrington has got a team in the fold you might not have expected. Is Washington seriously in the fold for another 5-star recruit? Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies is here to discuss. Brandon Arrington is one of my favorite recruits in the class of 2026 because he is one of the most unique recruits in the cycle. A true two-way guy, kind of Travis Hunter light. I think he's the first thing we've really seen or will see in college football since Travis Hunter that legitimately goes both ways. He happens to do it at the same positions of defensive back and receiver. I think he's DB first, receiver second, but can be really good at both. But at what felt like the last moment to me, Roman, where he had been in, he'd been considering, has been and continues to consider schools like Oregon, USC, Texas A&M, all in the full. All of a sudden, he was up at Washington. He was in Seattle, rocking the Husky gear on the OV. Is this a serious push, or is this him just going, well, if they'll give me an official visit, sure, visits are fun?
No, absolutely. It definitely is. So, Spencer, first of all, you need to watch yourself some Celeste Moa film. That kid in Utah is also Travis Hunter-esque, plays both sides of the ball, wide receiver and safety. Another person who's on an official visit to Washington this past weekend, which kind of leads into, some of the things that we can talk about with Brandon Arrington, where the elite speed on the track is one thing, but yes, Washington is seriously in this race, and he said so himself. He's been all over social media. Hey, don't sleep on Washington in my recruitment. I'm really, really impressed with everything I saw up there, and that's one of the things that I can't say I'm surprised by, because Washington, and especially secondary coach John Richardson, has pushed this DBU tradition that Washington really has gotten going over the last 5-10 years, really since, Desmond Trufant, Marcus Peters. It goes way further back than that. But Washington has been one of the best schools in the nation at pumping out high-quality defensive backs over the last 10, 15 years. And Brandon Arrington has taken notice of that. And as he said in a recent interview with On3's Chad Simmons, he said, I'm looking for 3 things. Who's going to recruit me the hardest? Who's going to develop me the best? And who's going to get me on the field early? And especially those last 2, Washington has a great case for. They might have the best cornerback in the nation this season in Tacario Davis, who was really impressive during his time at Arizona, especially under John Richardson, when he was second in the nation, I believe, with 16 pass breakups as a sophomore. And now having him back, that group back together for their senior season, it's going to be a big sell of, hey, look at how well I can develop these big, unique athletes, a lot like Brandon Arrington. And after this season, Washington's secondary, especially at corner, there's going to be a lot of questions. Everybody outside of junior Leroy Bryant is going to be a sophomore or younger on the depth chart. Well, I believe he's going to be a true sophomore next season, and Dylan Robinson is going to play in every game as a true freshman. I think that he might be penciled in as a starter. There is a lot of room for Brandon Arrington to get on the field early at Washington, and I think he's taking notice of that.
With the schools that are in the fold, and I know you mentioned the points that didn't bring up NIL, but I want to talk about that angle of it because It's a factor for anybody that is this highly rated of a recruit. He may very well, value above all else the development, the playing time, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's the right way for high school recruits. If I had a kid or knew somebody that was going through the process, that's where I'd tell them to focus. Like get the football right, discuss the NIL after the fact. But let's say, Roman, it comes down to Oregon, Washington, USC. He wants to stay on the West Coast. And I'm just throwing a hypothetical out there. USC has reportedly made significant upgrades to their NIL efforts. It's paying off on the trail. We all know that Oregon is a tier 1 NIL school in college football. If it were to come down to that, where that's the only real differentiating factor between the three places, do you feel like Washington's in a position to where they could offer at least a comparable amount to what Oregon and USC might?
So I would have to say yes, because I brought up Celeste Mo a little bit ago to just kind of go back to that point. Washington has done a really good job, especially in year 2 under Jed Fish, getting some of these high value prospects on campus. They had a top 100 recruit in 4-star wide receiver Vance Spafford, who's committed to Georgia, up on campus last weekend for an official visit. They've had, they're inviting a couple of Texas A&M commits, and we know how that goes with NIL, in Madden Williams, who was here last weekend, and then 4-star edge rusher from Southern California, who's also committed to them. That's coming up this weekend as well for an official visit. And if you are able to compete with, those, just the likes of those schools and able to earn an official visit, you have to be somewhat competitive in the NIL space. It doesn't matter at all for this discussion, but I think in the same sense it does, because it's a different sport. College basketball. Washington was one of the highest spenders through NIL in the transfer portal for college basketball. Yep. And that's something that just shows, hey, this school has all of the resources to compete for these high-value prospects. We've already seen them pull off a big-time flip in 5-star offensive tackle Cody Green, stealing him away from Oregon, where Washington is certainly as ready to compete as anyone in the NIL space, because there is so much to offer in terms of, the Fortune 500 companies that are in the area and everything, which is something that Jed Fish has, made no secret about since he's gotten here.
Elsewhere on the recruiting trail for Washington, obviously pulling Arrington, especially with how, relatively late it feels like they've gotten into the fold compared to everybody else that's going after him, that would be a big time splash. But Washington is doing solid things on the trail, top 25 class according to 24/7 right now. Do you feel like they have the ability to get, let's say, inside the top 15 when the 2026 cycle is all said and done, whether they get Arrington or not?
I believe they do, and it's going to come down to one thing and one thing alone. That's defensive line recruiting. That's the overhaul that Washington needs to make the most of on the trail this year, no matter what. You're losing 13 scholarship guys at the position over the next 2 seasons. So they want to make sure they address that right away. They get out in front of it. And they're in the mix for a lot of big-time guys. A couple ones that I want to point to in particular. One of them, who is one of my favorite recruits to watch on film in this entire class, is 4-star T.I.U. Mukais from Cherry Creek High School in Colorado, who's going to be up here this weekend for his official visit. 4-star David Schwerzel from O'Day High School here in Seattle has set his commitment date for June 19th.
Shout out O'Day. Shout out O'Day. It's where my cousins went to high school, so I always got to shout them out any chance I get.
I absolutely respect that. I got some great friends that went there as well. And he's got a crystal ball to choose Washington as well. Another guy who Washington's competing with Ohio State and Notre Dame for is 4-star defensive lineman Kari Wilder from down Southern California. And if you're able to have that be the anchor of your class, along with the number 1 player in the state of Washington in 4-star defensive lineman Derek Coleman-Brusa, you're in a really, really good spot at that position. And 4-star guys along the defensive line, that's a tongue twister, really. That's something that really can be the anchor of a top 15 class.
Coleman-Bruce is number 1 defensive lineman in Washington, right? Because Cody Green's got to be the top overall player in the state, isn't he?
No, he plays at Mater Dei down in Southern California. He's a top five player in California.
That's right. But he's got ties to coaches that are up in the Seattle
He started
area.
his career up here. That's right. He played his first 2 years at Eastside Catholic.
That's right. Okay. I knew there was some tie to him in the Seattle area. Still, I will jot that down as what my high school history and government teacher, Mr. Noble, will call a moment of cerebral flatulence.
Another shout out. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. You never forget where you come from. Obviously, that's how I roll. That's how Roman Tomashoff rolls. Locked On Huskies, great work as always, my man. Appreciate the insight. Appreciate everybody listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.